But good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here. And thank you to NGO for this partnership, where I have this opportunity to talk about, and I call it data, the Data Protection Act, and the Cyber and Data Protection Act, and its implications for civil society. Okay. Let's see if this...
Let you listen. Do you know? Did it last?
Now, sir?
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go. 4 weeks up. Just point at dates.
Okay. Thank you. So maybe just to start, Sandra's already talked about who I am. Just a little bit about who Solika Consulting is. Solika Consulting has 3 main hubs which work with civil society, and a 4th one which works with young people. Our main consulting work is helping NGOs and businesses to strengthen governance and compliance, and operational effectiveness and sustainability. We also have a learning hub, which is meant to provide accessible professional training and capacity building for individuals and organizations. This is both in-person and online training. We have a tech solutions arm, which it works to connect organizations with the right digital tools and hardware to be able to work smarter. We also have what we're calling Solika Study Connect, which essentially is working with young people, students, with career coaching, study abroad opportunities, and working with them to find relevant support for their learning journeys. We work mainly with universities in Southern Africa, Europe, and sometimes Australia. Okay. Our NGO service offering, data protection is the first one. Hence, we are here with this presentation, and happy to be partnering with NGO going forward around data protection compliance. Strategic planning and project design, like has been mentioned, sustainability planning, resource mobilization, institutional strengthening, different tech solutions. We've just launched what we're calling the NGO series, which is different resources to support learning and development across the NGOs. To that end, we have 2 free offerings. The first one is an institutional plan framework, which is a practical guide for organizational growth and development. And this is really us saying, sometimes we wait for donors to come with capacity building projects or to infuse the capacity development into their existing grants. But we think it's time for us to be able to take our own organizational development into our own hands and be proactive, know what our needs are, and work towards building our organizational capacity, even in the absence of donor funds. There's a lot of things that we can do for ourselves if we have the right tools. We also have a guide for smart procurement, for smarter impact, which is helping NGOs to develop procurements for engaging consultants. You work with a lot of consultants. And so this tool is essentially just to help NGOs to be able to say, how do we procure smarter? How do we not have to go through 150 applicants when we only need 1? And everyone else is out of budget, things like that. So it's just practical tools based on some of the work that I've been doing with civil society, but also drawing from some of the institutional practices of the now defunct USAID, which was my home for the last 12 years in Zimbabwe. And a lot of you are people in the room I've worked with through my work with USAID, so it's always warm to be in a space like this. So what is data protection? And essentially, there's a definition there, but essentially we're talking about legal and organizational measures that ensure the lawful, secure, and transparent handling of personal information. So the key there is that we're protecting personal information, and we're making sure that we're handling personal information in lawful, secure, and transparent means. So it governs, when we think about data, it governs how we collect, process, store, share, and protect data. The Act also gives individuals rights. So I'll go into a little bit about data, what they call data subjects and data subject rights, which are drawn from the Act and the relevant regulations which have been put up by Portras. Okay, so just in the region, 36 African countries have data protection laws, including Zimbabwe. 12 of these are SADC countries. We have 9 data protection authorities. And SADC now has a modernized SADC model law for data protection, which they're using as a framework to be able to push reform and lawmaking in this space. Okay, coming home to Zimbabwe. So that's a list of the entire framework. All of the different pieces of practices, the rules, coming from the National Development Strategy, NDS-1, and I'm sure we'll have a reference for NDS-2 soon. The National ICT Policy, which runs up to 2027. The Constitution of Zimbabwe, Section 57, which is the right to privacy. The Cyber and Data Protection Act of 2022. It was first promulgated in 2021. However, there were there was a little bit of a delay and then came back, and so it's official 2022 with the only change was the name. So cyber was added to the beginning of the name and then it was promulgated. Then Portras has also been working hard doing regulations. So we have the 2024 regulations, which govern the licensing of data controllers and the appointment of data protection officers. They also have guidelines around these issues. So there's the guidelines on data protection officers, and there's also the guidelines on licensing of data controllers, 2024 and 2025 respectively. Over the last few years, Portras has been doing a lot of awareness around what the law says and what are our different obligations around the law. They've also started doing data protection training because in terms of our law, data protection officers must be certified, trained and certified by Portras. Okay, so let's just go through some key concepts. If you have any questions, I would say note them down. We may not have a lot of time in plenary, but one of the things we've agreed to with NGO is to take all of the questions and to produce a frequently asked questions document, which will then be circulated to all of you as well as others who have not been able to attend. So we commit to answering all of your questions, even if we're not able to do so in plenary. Okay, so personal data. Any information relating to an identified or identifiable person. So my name, my ID number, contact details, biometric data, location information, medical records. All of these are examples of personal data. In some literature, you'll see it referred to as PII, which is personally identifiable information. Often we think of these as just the standards, but anything really, depending on the context, can be personal data. So my vehicle registration number, because my registration book in the database at is called CRV, has my name and everything, and there's probably a way of finding it. If you have my vehicle registration number, you can probably find my name, right? And law enforcement agencies do that all the time. So even your vehicle registration number is personal data. Sensitive personal data. So this is a category which demands a greater level of protection. So this is information dealing with health, biometric or genetic data, religious or political beliefs, sexual life, or criminal history. So there's an additional layer of protection that's required for this really sensitive personal data. And why is data protected? It stems really from the constitutional right to privacy. So I may need to disclose my data for access certain services or for certain purposes, but it doesn't mean that my data needs to be all over the place, right? I have to have a right to say, this is how my data is shared, this is where I decide to share my data.
Thanks.
So the Act really is meant to protect individuals. It's meant to protect what the Act calls data subjects. But the Act also balances the need for us to collect data. We collect data all the time. We collect personal data all the time. Everyone sitting in this room, if we can show by hands, who has a security guard at their gate of their offices or their building?
Right.
All right. What is that security guard sitting there for an 8-hour shift every day doing? What are they collecting? They're collecting data, right? They're collecting personal data. You ask for our names. Sometimes you ask for our ID numbers. You ask who I'm coming to see. That may not be personal, but yeah. You also ask time in, time out, and then you ask me to sign. Can I ask who knows what happens with that data? Outside your own organization. Whether it's collected by a private security company or it's collected by a guard that you personally hire. What happens to that data? Internalized somewhere. It goes into this opaque beast. Is it analyzed?
So
It's probably just stored somewhere. Does anyone know what purpose it serves? Yeah? Okay. So let's go into that. Data controllers. Any individual or organization that determines the purpose and means of processing personal data. So if as a director you decide that at your gate, the guard must collect information which is classified as personal data, you're a data controller? Yeah? In our communities, we have registers. At this workshop, we have a register that's collecting personal data, right? So the Act then gives us responsibilities. It also gives us sanctions, which we should go through. Another key issue is data processing. So third parties often process our data. We often use payroll companies or ICT vendors. We give them employee data. They churn out a pay slip and you put money into people's accounts. That is personal data. Okay. So the Cyber and Data Protection Act, and I'll go through this quickly. It designates POTRAS as the Data Protection Authority, and it also stipulates POTRAS's functions. It talks about data protection principles, which are key because that is what the data controller's obligation is. It stems from the data protection principles. It talks about the rights of data subjects and the obligations of controllers. Right, I'll skip through the functions of the POTRAS. Let's talk about the data protection principles just quickly. So accuracy, for example, we're talking about controllers ensuring that data is complete, correct, and regularly updated. Lawfulness. You as a controller, you must know the data that you are collecting, and it must be collected and processed according to the law, fairly, and not in a secretive or deceptive way. Purpose limitation. This speaks to data being used for specific, explicit, and legitimate purposes. And it can only be communicated to persons before or at, this must be communicated to persons before or at the time of collection. So I'll talk quickly about consent. I noticed on the NANGO forms, you're consenting to taking pictures. So I must also consent to my data being collected, right? And there must be no penalty for me not consenting, right? Does this jive with all of our obligations? I ask the donors in the room, if the form comes in and, you know what I've said, I want to participate in this workshop, but I don't consent to you collecting my data. Yeah? Are we then in compliance? So, there's going to be balancing acts which are necessary. And these are things which data controllers and you as the leaders of data controllers will need to think through. Unfortunately, with data protection, this is not something that you could, but I wouldn't advise it. Copy-paste policies and put them on a shelf. Because this is living and this is auditable. Like I said, Potras has been doing a lot of awareness. They've been doing a lot of training. The Act is 2022 Act. Regulations came into force in 2024. We are now in 2025. There's an important deadline, 12 March of 2025, where data controllers should have registered by, right? So as we go forward into 2026, Potras is moving into an enforcement mode, right? So it's opportune that we're having this conversation now, so that you're able to prepare, able to make sure that you've crossed all your T's and dotted all the I's before the regulator comes knocking, right? And this is not just the NPOs or the NGO sector. All sectors. This law affects private sector, banks, insurance companies, funeral homes. Anyone who is collecting personal data is impacted by this act. The obligations of controllers, quickly. It's mandatory if you're a data protection controller to appoint a DPO in terms of the act. Right. You're exempted if you have less than 50 subjects, but I don't think anyone here has less than 50 subjects. Just the communities you work in alone, there's more than 50 people there. Staff should be counted as data subjects because we're collecting HR data, which we're storing and filing and processing every month through our payroll systems. Right. So if you have a big staff, your staff alone puts you into that bracket. You could be exempted if you're collecting personal data for personal reasons, like if it's a family WhatsApp group and things like that, but that's none of you here, right? Data protection officers, the Act goes into detail, and we'll share this presentation so you'll have access to all of this. Their functions are stipulated in the Act, but essentially the data protection officer is an advisor to the data controller to make sure that you are compliant with the law. So they must know the law. They have to be certified by Potras, and you must notify Potras who you've appointed as your data protection officer. Must. Not can, not should, but must. Okay. Consequential amendments that the Act, it amended the Criminal Law Codification and Reform Act, the Criminal Procedure and Evidence Act, and also the Interception of Communications Act. And I know for a long time, in the beginning, when this was still a bill as civil society, we focused on these provisions. There was a lot of advocacy around, the cyber crime and, all of those things and conversations. But the law does speak in great detail about data protection. And now there's regulations. Operationalization. So the deadline, which is important there, is 12 March 2025, the deadline for obtaining data controller licenses. Right. Implications of non-compliance. I don't want to scare you, but this is in the law. So level 11 fines, or 7 years imprisonment, or both, depending on what the breach is. So it could be failing to obtain a license within the stipulated time. It could be processing data without a license. So you don't have a license and then you continue to process data without a license. Or it could be failure to discharge any of the data controller obligations, which are in section 10 of the regulations. My presentation has links to the law and all of the regulations, and as well as the guidelines which Potras has done. They're really, really simple. I encourage you all, if you're an NGO director, read at least the guidelines. You may not have to read the law, but read at least the guidelines so that you know. Because this imprisonment is not, it will come personally attached on an individual who sits in the highest seat in the organization, right? Just a few recommendations. Appoint a data protection officer at the right level. Someone who's able to give advice, someone who is able to be independent and can tell you that, boss, we're supposed to do this. This is what the law says. And someone who you will then listen to, right? So make sure that you're appointing someone at the right level. I would encourage you to do comprehensive and integrated data mapping. Figure out where your data is. What data are you collecting? Why are you collecting it? Implement, and if possible, an automated data subjects rights management system. This is because the law gives data subjects the right to access their information that you are holding. So a staff member can come to HR and say, can I take a look at my file? Right, that's their data that you have, and they have a right to access it. But also, as a data controller, you have to document all of those requests, how you responded to them, so that when Portras comes knocking, you're able to show them how you've been handling data subject access requests. So for NGOs, that will look very different than for a bank. So if I'm a bank and I go and ask for my statement, or different types of things, we're looking at different responsibilities. Time up.
In conclusion,
do not delegate the need for knowledge to your DPO. Your DPO is trained, yes. Your DPO will be certified, yes. But the sanction is not on the DPO, even if they don't do their job. The sanction is on the data controller, which is you, which means that you need to supervise, you need to make sure that your DPOs have the correct job descriptions, and you're managing those processes from a knowledgeable perspective, all right? Everyone in the organization needs to know their roles and needs to know what they need to do, right? That includes your field staff as well, because data leaks often happen at the lowest levels in the organizations, right?
Right, so unfortunately I have to give you like 10 seconds to finish, because really 10 seconds.
Okay. So, last thing, as Solika, we're in partnership with NANGO for this session. One of the things that we're offering for NGOs, we do an NGO data protection health check, which is a tool that we've tailored for NGOs. So you feel free to send us an email to request a health check. It is a paid service. Let me preface with that. But we'll do a free health check for the first 5. Please use the promo code NANGODIR. So anyone who signs up for a health check after this event, if you're among the first 5, we'll do it for you free. The health check comes with a report, which essentially is a remediation report. What is it that you need to do going forward?